Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Supreme Council for Sin.
God is supreme.
Supreme Council for Sin.
God is supreme.
God is supreme.
Supreme Council for Sin.
You are welcome to this press conference organized by the Supreme Council for Sin worldwide. As you are aware, the Supreme Council for Sin is a non-governmental organization committed to the projection of the government and governor of Rivers State. Its membership cuts across political parties, professional bodies, captains of industries, and all that. I'm sure you're already familiar with our activities in the state. And I'm going to read our position on the state of things in Rivers State. After a critical and unbiased review of the current state of political affairs in Rivers State, as it affects good governance and service delivery, the entrenchment of true and uninterrupted democratic rule, the respect for the rule of law, and the taste for integrity in leadership, the Supreme Council for Sin worldwide critically, after due diligence and thorough situational analysis, wish to state unequivocally, in respect of the declaration of the state of emergency and subsequent suspension of the elected governor of Rivers State, Sir Siminalayi Fubara, the Rivers State House of Assembly, and systematic dismantling of the administrative structure of the entire state. We hereby restate that the entire process of governance in this state is condemned by the state of emergency declared by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We state that the dangerous and unconstitutional action taken by our President, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, on March 18, 2025, to wit, the declaration of a state of emergency in Rivers State and the illegal suspension of the democratically elected governor, deputy governor, and the State House of Assembly is not only unlawful, but also a clear subversion of democracy and imposition of autocratic federal control over a duly elected state government. We strongly condemn the development and call on all Nigerians of good conscience to resist this brazen assault on the Constitution of our country and the institutions of our democracy. Mr. President's unconstitutional actions taken by Mr. President's unconstitutional proclamation was presumably driven by the protracted, insidious political crisis in Rivers State, sponsored by his appointee, which culminated in the recent protracted ruling of the Supreme Court. Naturally, we expected all parties to the dispute to follow laid-down procedures and in good faith to promptly implement the judgment of the highest court of the land. The Supreme Council for Sin notes that despite provocative statements and belligerent attitude of opponents towards the governor, Governor Fubara had demonstrated goodwill and disposed to the implementation of the ruling of the Supreme Court. The pronouncement made by the Supreme Court in Rivers State and on Rivers State crisis were getting bold and monumental. In one of the judgments, the Apex Court barred the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Accountant General of the Federation, and other agencies from releasing funds to Rivers State government until it purges itself of what the court described as flagrant disobedience to court orders. All attempts to get this sorted out were frustrated by the pro-Wike lawmakers under the speakership of Martins Amewule, putting the lifeline of civil servants, contractors, and functionaries of government into a state of comatose. Apart from ensuring that the lawmakers function effectively, which they frustrated, their inaction in ensuring that the governor presents the budget puts Rivers State in a big risk. Again, a verdict that barred the ruling local government by unelected people, requiring that only an updated voters register should be released by INEC, we consider as a group as a dubious judgment. Other states had earlier conducted their own local government elections using the same INEC register. Today, an entire democratically elected third-tier government has been sacked by the same misguided arrangement just to satisfy the inordinate ambition of one man. However, rather than rise above the fray, our dear president yielded to petty favoritism and betrayed his oath of office. He solemnly swore to before God and man, which was to do right to all manner of people according to law, without fear or favor, without affection or ill will. If President Tinubu had conveniently disguised his true intentions in the past, his broadcast to the nation on the 18th of March 2025 betrayed his bias and fell far below the standard of comportment expected from his exalted office. Without doubt, the Nigerian Constitution does not empower the president to remove an elected governor, deputy governor, or state assembly. Under any circumstances, the procedure for removing a governor is clearly outlined in Section 188 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, through an impeachment process initiated by the State House of Assembly with verifiable, valid reasons and not by presidential proclamation or arbitrary pronouncement. Section 305 of the Constitution allows the president to declare a state of emergency only in extreme cases where public safety, national security, or Nigeria's sovereignty is at serious risk. However, it does not grant him the power to suspend elected officials or to demolish democratic structures as he has brazenly done in Rivers State. Furthermore, Section 3051 states that any proclamation of emergency is subject to the provisions of this Constitution, meaning it cannot override the tenure and removal procedures of a governor. However, the conditions under Section 305(3) declaring a state of emergency include war or external aggression, breakdown of public order and safety, natural disasters, or any other grave emergency threatening Nigeria's corporate existence. It is known fact that none of these conditions exist in the current circumstances in Rivers State. There is no war, there is no widespread violence, there is no breakdown of law and order, and nothing to have warranted declaration of state of emergency in Rivers State. Again, alternative legal avenues were ignored just to satisfy one man. If the issues were as dysfunctional as they were made to be in Rivers State, the president could have encouraged the National Assembly to intervene under Section 11 of the Constitution. However, even under such intervention, the governor and deputy governor cannot be removed by any arm of government except through constitutional means, as provided in Section 11. Section 11 clearly provides. We therefore see what is going on in the state as a manufactured crisis for political control, as the state of emergency declaration is not about security. It is about grabbing and control of power in Rivers State. The disagreement within Rivers State stemmed from the defection of 27 assembly members from the PDP to the APC, the loss of seats under constitutional provisions, the subsequent political maneuvering to undermine the governor's mandate. Rather than allowing the law to take its course, the federal government, through its allies in the state, has engineered a crisis in a peaceful state to justify this obvious, premeditated, and brazen and cynical unconstitutional action. The Supreme Council for SYMFONI find the federal government's excuse of pipeline vandalism as quite untenable and even laughable, because it was also orchestrated by their own cronies just to achieve this unfortunate development in our state. However, we all know that the security of national infrastructure falls squarely under the responsibilities of federal security agencies and privately contracted security firms. If this issue had to do with breach of security in whatever form, the question that should naturally be asked is who controls the police, the military, the DSS, Is it the governor of Rivers State that controls all of these people? It is controlled by the federal government under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So what will it benefit Mr. President to keep one man who is apparently his appointee and lose the Nigerian economy and peace of the nation? That is the question that we ask. Our dear President, this is not just about Rivers State. This is about Nigeria's economic survival. Our soldiers are fighting to keep Nigeria safe. There is no need to add other problems to the ones that we already have. Why we waste energy escalating political battles in Rivers State? Thousands of Nigerian soldiers are still fighting for their lives and for the nation's survival against insurgents, bandits, kidnappers in the northeast, northwest, and north central. These are the real emergencies. These are the crises that demand decisive leadership and, if possible, states of emergencies, not Rivers State. The men and women of our armed forces are stretched thin, battling terrorists, criminal networks daily. They do not need yet another crisis to divert resources and attention by the establishment of another military rule in Rivers State. Our dear President, the Supreme Council for SIM worldwide, believes that Nigeria cannot afford to be fighting multiple fronts of wars, politically, economically, and militarily. We do not open a new vista in Rivers State. And so wars are still raging. We don't need to add one. This portends disaster for our administration, the economy, and the nation. A state of emergency is not a strategy. It's an admission of failure by the federal government. There are far more effective, far less destructive ways to handle the situation in Rivers State. Once again, our dear President, declaration of emergency does not automatically dissolve or suspend elected state government. The Constitution does not empower the President to unilaterally remove an elected governor. Such actions amount to unconstitutional usurpation of power and a fundamental breach of the federal structure of Nigeria. The purported removal of Governor Fubara, his deputy, and members of Rivers State House of Assembly is therefore unconstitutional, unlawful, and a dangerous affront to our nation's democracy. The appointment of Vice Admiral Ibas, administrator to govern Rivers State, raises another constitutional issue and is already brewing fresh crises on so many fronts. From the civil service to extra-ministerial departments and agencies, the 1999 Constitution does not recognize the office of an administrator in place of an elected governor. The Constitution only provides for a governor elected by the people, as stated in Section 1761. A deputy governor elected alongside the governor, as stated in Section 186. The only situation where an unelected official can assume control of a state is under military rule, which is not applicable under democratic system by the 1999 Constitution. And so we believe that Rivers State does not deserve to be placed under military rule at this time. By disregarding the rule of law, the President has shown a dangerous willingness to trample on democracy. The declaration of a state of emergency in Rivers State is not just reckless, it is a clear attempt to return us to the state of nature and tighten its grip on power at all costs. It is a degrading backdoor imposition of martial rule on a strategic part of the Federation with all the measure that it has taken, and also biased interpretation of Section 3051 of the 1999 Constitution. A state of emergency does not mean an elected governor can be removed. We want to continue to emphasize that. It does not mean that an elected governor can be removed unilaterally by the President. That is not our interpretation of a state of emergency. This decision does not align with democratic norms or good governance. Instead, it appears to be a predetermined action serving specific interest rather than the collective good of the people of Rivers State and Nigeria. This action constitutes unconstitutional overreach, setting a dangerous precedent that threatens democracy the rule of law, and the separation of powers. If left unchecked, it could foster a culture of impunity, and other states in the Federation will also suffer from it. Having already been grappling with non-adherence to electoral qualifications, rules, and massive rigging, adding arbitrary removal to elected officials will push us to a state of jeopardy and anarchy. In the light of the foregoing, the Supreme Council for SIM Worldwide hereby state as follows. 1. Calls on the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu GCFR, and Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces to see himself as the father of all Nigerians, irrespective of position and status, and to immediately bring to an end this state of near anarchy in Rivers State. 2. Be reminded of his role in the entrenchment of democracy as exemplified by his staunch support for the rule of law, equity, justice, and true federalism, which were what he stood for during his reign in Nadeko. 3. Ensure the speedy return and reinstatement of the democratically elected governor of Rivers State and all democratic structures under the governorship of Sir Siminalayi Fubara. 4. By all means, resist the temptation of being used by selfish politicians in the state as a cover to perpetuate the dismembership of already constituted democratic structures in the state to satisfy personal interest. 5. Warns that suspending elected officials under democratic rule sets a dangerous precedent that undermines democracy and could be misused to unseat elected governments in future. 6. Demands that all action taken in Rivers State strictly conforms to constitutional provisions and Nigeria's democratic norms. And finally, encourages all stakeholders, including the judiciary, civil society, the international community, to closely monitor the situation in Rivers State to prevent unconstitutional governance and abuse of power and ensure the return of the governor of Rivers State, Sir Siminalayi Fubara. The Supreme Council for SIM Worldwide remains committed to upholding the Constitution, defending democratic governance, and ensuring the rule of law prevails in Nigeria. We have even seen in recent times part of the movie to continue to paint the governor in bad light, as demonstrated by the former head of service, who was apparently coerced to say things that are not tenable, just so that they continue to paint the governor in bad light. We, as a group, condemn that poorly scripted movie and to say that they should desist from such deceits. Nigerians are not deceived. We stand by the fact that we have elected a governor, and that governor has a mandate of Rivers people, and he must be returned as governor for Rivers State. God bless you, and thank you for listening.